Yo, what's going on? I was just having some fun with Gemini. I was gonna experiment with genrefying. I had kind of made up that word, genrefying. Some uh, scenes, plots, stories, and narration. So let's take something like the story of a man. Idea. I was gonna say sailor. Idea, sailor, gone pirate. Just something simple. Right, sailor's gone pirate. Plots. Plot is going down to Hades. Going down to Hades. Don't make the whole journey. Neptune's spike. Story of a man, idea, sailor going pirate. And that catalyst is Neptune's spite. Antagonist is the Royal British Navy. And then but we want to genrefy this as indie independent. So the scenes and story and narration, cadence, vocab, follow all that. Because we're going to do a couple of genreifications, switches. So we have the sailor turned pirate concept, genreified, for the indie independent space. Think A24 style slow burn, gritty historical realism, mixed with psychological horror, poetic but sparse narration, a heavy focus on atmosphere, guilt, and the uncanny rather than blockbuster swashbuckling. And what it said is poetic but sparse narration. So with that poetic but sparse narration, we want to definitely make the scenery like gritty seashore and use an ocean instead of sea, right? Just because. Just because in the past I have seen where like outrageous costumes can be used for traversing an ocean instead of a sea. We're going to have a heavy focus on atmosphere, guilt, and the uncanny rather than blockbuster swashbuckling. That's kind of cool. The indie genreification, the tone maybe grim, muddy, claustrophobic, and hallucinatory. That's kind of cool because that's a lot cheaper than drugs, cheaper than lights, cheaper than buying a bunch of swords and getting people cut up. Cadence was rhythmic but broken. Short, sharp sentences mixed with run-on, stream of consciousness thoughts. I kind of dig that. Vocabulary would be nautical but archaic, salty and rusted. We use words like bilge, brine, caulking, consumptive, phosphorescence, and keel. Hades, a metaphor. Underworld is in a fiery cave with a devil. It's the crushing, pitch black, deep of the ocean trench, the suffocating belly of a sinking brig, and the psychological descent into madness. So, like I said, protagonist, we're going to have Sailor Gone Pirate, Silas Vance, no flashy hat, no gold teeth, just salt-bitten skin, a permanent tremor in his hands, and a stolen coat that doesn't fit him. They're going to say the Neptune Spite is the ship, a rotting three-masted merchant vessel. Silas and a skeleton crew mutinied to steal. She leaks, she groans like a dying beast, and she smells of wet dog and vinegar. The antagonist is HMS Sovereign, not a grand, clean warship, but a monolithic, sterile engine of the British Empire. To Silas, the Royal Navy isn't just a law, it's a cold, unfeeling machine that grinds men into gristle. You'll have scene 1, the turn, scene 2, the plot beat, the chase in the fog, scene 3, climax, descending to Hades. That was just real quick, some scenes. But I had originally said with that poetic but sparse narration, want to definitely make the scenery gritty seashore and use an ocean instead of a sea. The shift to wait a minute, we're using an ocean instead of a sea. The shift to the open ocean changes everything. The sea has shores. The ocean is a cold, indifferent infinity. To match that, we drag the setting down to a gritty, salt scab seashore, not a picturesque beach, but a jagged, damp wasteland of gray shingle, rotting kelp, and dead dogfish. Setting, the black shingle as a setting. You have the edge of the continent as a scene. The plot beat is launching from the shingle. Deep water descent. As the HMS Sovereign closes the distance, Silas steers the Spite past the continental shelf, where the pale green coastal water drops off into the ink black abyss of the open ocean. And I'm just setting it up. The Spite is traveling from port Portamontu to Caymans, and the Sovereign catches word that the ship contains royal gold, 4 6-pounders from Portugal that must be returned. Details the stakes perfectly. In keeping with our gritty, independent, poetic tone, the royal gold isn't polished coins and chest boxes. It's heavy, raw bullion, cold and dirty. And those 4 Portuguese 6-pounders aren't just weapons. They're dead, rusting iron weights that drag the spikes, rotten timbers inches lower into the freezing Atlantic swells. Here's how the journey from Monto to the Caymans becomes a claustrophobic, high-stakes descent. The log in the cargo, the Neptune Spite. From the salt-caked wharves of Monto, a miserable rain-drowned port, smelling of cod liver oil and wet coal, across the empty, gray expanse of the ocean toward the Caymans. The weight, stowed deep in the damp bilge under layers of rotting canvas and wet gravel ballast, lie the 4 Portuguese 6-pounder cannons. Bronze and iron, stamped with the coat of arms of the House of Braganza. They're heavy, awkward, and legally crown property. Alongside them, chests of raw, unrefined bullion, cold gray gold bars that smell of lead and sweat. And what we might do is there's tons of stuff going on all of a sudden with scenes. Classic. We're gonna have the Indian ship Kalaman side with the sovereign. We're gonna have the Indian ship Kalaman side with the sovereign. So if you know about the East India Company, there it goes. The addition of the Kalaman, the Indian country ship, auxiliary to the East India Company, built of heavy, oil dark Malabar teak and smelling of pickled lime and wet quar, thickens the black water around the spy. This is getting deep now. Now Silas is caught between two empires. The sovereign is the cold, iron fist of the crown. The Kalaman is the greasy, tireless hound of the company sent to make sure the books balance. Here's how the Kalaman joins the hunt on the great Atlantic shelf. The new player, the Kalaman, not a sleek European frigate, but a massive, blunt-nosed merchantman built in the yards of Bombay. Her timbers are teak, heavier than oak, nearly impossible to rot, and so dense she rides low and quiet in the swells. The East India Company has its own ledgers to protect. The Portuguese guns in the Monto gold were tied to a company treaty. The Kalaman isn't there for glory or the king's honor. She's here for the salvage. She is that makes sense. So the sovereign is going to try to sink her. Kalaman is going to try to salvage the gold and the four Portuguese 6-pounders from the wreckage. So that sounds pretty cool. But we're experimenting with genre finding. So switch genre, like to comic book style. What happens when I type that in? It says something about pencils and ink. Comic book genreification. We're pivoting the style from a slow burn, gritty indie film to a moody, high contrast graphic novel style. Think Hellboy meets Sin City on the high seas. The art style, I don't really want it to be art. So, be careful with that. Okay. Switch, just experiment. Switch genre to noir. Minimalist. What happens when the whole thing's gonna hang up? Rules of the wet. More minimalist genreification. More minimalism is about stripping away the adjectives until only the bones remain. The ocean isn't a grand poetic abyss anymore. It's a wet black alleyway. The rain is just dirty water falling from a low ceiling. Silas Vance isn't a romantic pirate. He's a tired man who made a bad deal and is waiting for the check to clear. Monto to the Caymans, a straight line through 3,000 miles of cold black grease. Does that work? The bills smelled of stale vinegar and wet oak. Silas sat on a salt box. He had a stub of greased pencil in his hand. He didn't use it. There was nothing left to count. Down in the dark, the Lisbon guns lay in 6 inches of stagnant water. They looked like drowned horses, heavy, cold. Beside them, the bullion crate sat wedged in the gravel ballast. So, I don't like that one as much. Switch genre to Melvillian horror. Like there's a horror going on in all this. That would be kind of cool. Mine's going slow. Slow, slow, slow. Okay. Oh. Melvillian horror. To enter the Melvillian space is to abandon the dry, modern economy of words. Here, the ocean is not a mere body of water, but a vast, wet shroud, an infinite, unfeeling leviathan that mockingly mirrors the vanity of mankind. The prose becomes dense, archaic, and deeply biblical. Silas is no longer a mere captain. He is a doomed, prophetic figure fully conscious of his own damnation. I think it's hard to get, when you start sailing, hard to get away from Melville if you're going to do that, because it just works. It's biblical, it's prophetic, it's full of omens and things like that. What man, having stood upon the desolate, salt-crusted shingle of Monto, does not feel the cold creeping of mortality within his marrow? So that works. But the question is, does any other genreification work for this? Does any other genreification genreification work for this as well as Melvillian horror? Like Lovecraftian, abyssal insanity or something like that. The cosmic gulf, Lovecraftian abyssal insanity. See, this kind of works too. While Melville tackles the dark, monomaniacal depths of human obsession, Lovecraftian horror shifts the focus entirely. It isn't just an unfeeling force of nature, it's a cyclopean, ancient, and living entity. Silas and his crew are not heroic or tragic figures. They are insignificant insects crawling over the damp crust of an indifferent world. To genreify this as Lovecraftian, the cadence is verbose, clinically detached yet mounting in hysteria, filled with archaic and polysyllabic doom. Vocabulary would be cyclopean, non-Euclidean, squamous, eldritch, gelatinous, antediluvian, squamous, Stygian. It was in the damp, salt-corroded back alleys of Monto that the doom of the Neptune spite was first sealed. I like that. Genre swap to Elizabethan inspired biblical undertaking. Genreify swap to Elizabethan inspired biblical undertaking. Let's see what happens. The Great Flood, Elizabethan biblical undertaking. By shifting the genre to an Elizabethan-inspired biblical undertaking, we enter the territory of Shakespearean tragedy, Milton's Paradise Lost, and the poetic majesty of the King James Bible. Here, the ocean is not an indifferent void, but the very instrument of divine wrath, the same great deep that swallowed Pharaoh's chariots and cleansed the earth in the days of Noah. Silas Vance is a tragic Faustian figure who has sinned against both Caesar, the king, and God, and now prepares to render his soul unto the depths. And that's pretty cool because it's going to write it a lot like Milton. Did Milton write Paradise Lost? Yeah. To what end hath we gathered this heavy clay, this gold, this dross, dug from the secret veins of a cursed earth whereon the serpent crawls, and these four mouths of brass, cast by the hand of popish kings to spit out fire and death? They are but weights to bind us to our doom. The sea, God's great and uncorrupted glass, brooks no such earthly pride. The waters groan beneath the burden of our stolen sins. We did flee Monteau, thinking to find grace in southern climes. But lo, the eye of heaven doth pierce the fog, and sees the thieves escape. There is no harbor for the wicked soul, save in the cleansing fury of the deep. Cool, and that's going to do like actual prose for a while. The open ocean past the edge of the world's shelf. The wind rages, the HMS Sovereign and the Colomon close the gap like avenging angels. The heavens did put on a shroud of sackcloth, and the great waters of the Atlantic did trouble themselves, rising in gargantuan hills of foam. Behind them the Sovereign came riding upon the wings of the wind, her white sails shining like the raiment of a vengeful host. Beside her sailed the Calamon, a dark and monstrous ark of Indian teak, her timbers smelling of the bitter spices of Babylon, her decks lined with men of war, whose weapons glinted like stars upon the sea. They have compassed us about, Barnaby cried. It could be that's gotta be, this is probably the good stuff. There's a soliloquy by Silas, blow winds and crack your cheeks. Rage, blow, you cataracts and hurricane hoofs. That's kind of funny. So let's refine this. More density, longer sentences, more vocabulary. Let it be. There's a B thing, but biblical mood like wrath, and then stern language or something. I didn't totally like the hold of the Neptune spite. Silas Vance, clad in salt-bitten wool and girded with rusted iron, stands over the four Lisbon brasses and the heavy gray bullion of the custom house. He holds a single tallow candle, its flame guttering in the pestilential damp. Observe this heavy earth, this dross of Spain, squeezed from the dark and weeping ribs of mines where blind men delve in service to the worm. This is the God of Caesar and of scribes, the mammon of the world, whose dusty weight hath bowed the necks of nations to the oak. That's kind of cool. We're going to get a preview of that. That sounds pretty nice. The firmament did put on a buckram of thick darkness, and the waters of the great deep did heave themselves in the monstrous hills, as if they sought to drown the very stars in their salt foam. So we're going to do some further stuff. Add more nautical terms in bold, more English, Indian, and I think it's is it a Portuguese ship or an African ship? African ship and Portuguese artillery terms. Oh no! I didn't lose connection. We're going to add those nautical terms in bold, more English So it should be English ships, Indian ships, and African ships. So Silas is on an African ship. That's kind of cool. Okay. So the plot is that so simple. The sovereign catches up with the I forgot the name, with Silas, around the doldrums, and the Kalaman crew boards Silas' ship. They jank 2 6-pounders and throw them overboard. That was not supposed to happen. Not supposed to happen. The Sovereign then sinks Silas' ship. Sovereign decides to take loss. A little strategy there. Really, you want all 4 of the 6-pounder Portuguese 6-pounders back. Well, a little strategy there. Now let's look at it's kind of cool. The Sovereign's heavy balls strike the garboard strake and smash through the waterline of the Neptune supply. The main mast cracks with the sound of a falling cedar. The sea rushes through the scuppers, drowning the 2 remaining Lisbon guns in a foaming, bubbly vortex. Now, take all this and use the voice of Melville to narrate it as a serial novel. The Outlaw's Tally, or the Doom of the Seventh Penny. Chapter 1 of the Dead Balance in the Doldrums. If there be a spot on this watery orb where the Almighty seems to have suspended his breath and left the theater of his creation to stagnate into a greasy, unblinking eye of lead, it is that equatorial line which mariners with a grim and shivering familiarity designate the doldrums. It is a vast, glassy desert, a horizontal prison house where the air is not air, but a warm, pestilential yellow steam that clings to the throat, like the grease of bull mutton chop. Here the sails of the Neptune supply hung dead and yellow from her high yards, like the damp linen of a plague ward. Her shrouds slackened until they resembled the unstrung gut of some colossal waterlogged vial. And below, in the dark, suffocating bowels of the Orlop, lay that fatal triple-seal weight which had drawn us from the salt-crusted, coal-stinking wharves of Monteau. 4 heavy engines of Portuguese iron they were, Picas de Artillaria, cast in the royal foundries of Lisbon and stamped with the arrogant, armorial bearings of a crown that fancied it could hold the ocean in its fist. 2 great Colubrinas, long-necked and sullen, and 2 lesser falconetes, all wedged among the rotting ballast gravel alongside chests of gray, unrefined bullion that smelled of sulfur and wet lead. To the windward of our stagnant brig sat the HMS Sovereign, a three-decker mountain of British oak. Her 64 gun ports open like the teeth of a sleeping shark. Her towering quarterdeck catching what little heat radiated from the brassy sky. To our leeward wallowed the Colomine, a squat, monstrous country ship of Malabar teak, built in the yards of Bombay and smelling of rancid butter, pickled lime, and the damp core of the East India Company's warehouses. We were caught in the terrible, silent vice of wood and iron, becalmed upon the very lip of watery perdition. The peace of that glassy sepulchre was not shattered by the noble thunder of ordnance, but by the low, greasy rumble of a boarding party, with a dry, splintering thud of ash planks and the rattle of grappling irons. The crew of the Colomine, a desperate sun-parched host of lascars, sepoys, and company hirelings, swarmed over our wet chains. They did not come with the grand, orderly stride of the King's Marines, but with the frantic, ledger-driven hunger of clerks who smell a deficit. The Portuguese brass, screamed their leader, a man whose skin had been roasted to the color of old mahogany by the Indian sun, dragged them from the bilge, lightened the hull ere the Navy claims the salvage. Touch him not, cried poor Barnaby, who lay bound with coarse hemp against the base of the mainmast, his eyes wild with a sudden prophetic terror. Those guns are the very anchor stones of our damnation. They're numbered, they're counted. If you break the tally, you do but invite the great dissolution. But the company's men were deaf to the warnings of the spirit. With a brutal, scrambling fury, using neither cathead nor the proper breaching tackle of the ship, they dragged the two massive culabrinas up from the dark hatchway. They janked them, aye, with lawless, jerking violence that tore the wood from the spurketing, and heave-hoed them bodily over the low bulwarks. Splash, splash. That's pretty funny, because that's not even really the whole book. That's good stuff. Let's plan the whole book in so many acts. To map this out in the true Melvillian fashion as a sprawling theological and nautical serial novel, the book must be divided not merely into chapters, but into acts of testimony and judgment. I'm going to say also add in a chapter on deep Portuguese artillery, terminology. Just like Melville wrote one on whale anatomy, an excellent edition of Grand Tradition of Melville, who dedicated entire chapters to the minute classification of whale line, harpoons, and ambergris. We must insert a highly technical, deeply obsessive chapter detailing the archaic, heavy nomenclature of Portuguese founding yards. I like it. It is the colubrina that Silas Vance looks upon with the greatest dread. Upon the upper surface of its barrel, just behind the ornamental ring called the astragal, is engraved the royal coat of arms of the House of Braganza, the cross of Christ surmounted by an imperial crown. Ego sum vox clamantis in deserto. I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness. So that was pretty fun. Proposed table of contents. Outlaw's Tally, or The Doom of the Seventh Penny, being the complete table of contents of the serial novel. An account of the four Lisbon brasses, the lawless sinking of the brigantine Neptune spite, and the final settling of the ledger in the Atlantic Deep. So Act 1 is the weight of the clay. Act 2 is the twin beasts of the house of the host. Act 3, the glassy sepulchre, the becalming. Act 4, the Lord's grape shot, the sinking. Act 5, the bottomless audit. So, page count estimate. Oh, the serial format, 19th century magazines, and the bound volume. Act 1, estimated word count, 14,000 words, 45 pages. Total, 183 pages. Serial dispatch, 12 monthly installments. While 56,000 words is modest by modern fantasy standards, in the dense, Latinate, and highly technical prose in Melville, those pages will feel as heavy as a Portuguese Calabrino. There are no light chapters here. Every page is ballasted with maritime law, mineralogy, or theological dread. What if we publish to Kindle format? To translate our Melville style sea tragedy into the modern bloodless ledger of the Kindle digital format requires different kind of naval architecture. Estimated page counts, standard Kindle pages 200 to 220, about 56,000 words. It's a novella, a short novel. Could do short episodes. This is like a switch to like a Kindle novel. We are shifting our sails. The serial waters behind us now prepare the vessel for a singular monumental voyage as complete Kindle ebook. It's got everything's going on. No placeholders. No placeholders to support it. How long till a Kindle download complete edition? No joke. ChatGPT and everything else, they really struggle with this. 4 to 6 weeks of dedicated labor. Four to 6 weeks. So I can't just say, yo, make it right now. Let me see it right now. Life does not really support psychopathy. You know what I mean? $3.99 would not be bad. Cool. Let's draft Chapter 1, The Shingle of Montauk, in the true grand philosophical style of Herman Melville, establishing Silas and his crew. Let's again look at our table of contents. Act 1, the weight of the clay, the theft of Montauk. Looks like a lot of stuff there. Chapter 1, Kindle version, narration. The Shingle of Montauk, containing some initial muddy reflections upon the nature of shores, the greed of custom clerks, and the black water that waits at the edge of the world. Cool. It does not look that long, though. That's what I'm gonna say. Okay, the chapters don't look very long. What we've laid down here are the magazine edits, the stripped down, faster paced versions designed for quick digital skim. But the true heavy Melvillian novel does not skim, it wallows. That looks a little bit longer. Chapter 1. These are drafts, I think. These are the drafts. These are the drafts. Okay, so the nice thing is that you get a draft for chapter 1. We can go back and add those fragments of prose and things like that. Cool.